Fine, JUNGKOOK, marry him. Do whatever you want. Just don't come back to me pretending you ever cared. JIMIN said those words to me while his eyes were full of tears, and I swear even now I can still hear the way his voice broke at the end. I wanted to answer him. I wanted to tell him that everything he thought he knew was wrong. But before I could say anything, Taehyung stepped between us and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Don't, he said quietly. If you tell him the truth now, everything will fall apart. Hello everyone, this is JUNGKOOK. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I know what you're probably thinking. Wedding plans? Me? And why was Jimin standing in front of me like his entire world had just collapsed? Honestly, I've asked myself the same question more times than I can count. Because the truth is, the wedding was real. The plans were real. The phone calls, the hidden meetings, the messages I deleted before anyone could see them, all of it was real. But the person Jimin believed I was going to marry wasn't the whole truth. And Taehyung knew that. He knew something about me, about Jimin, and about that wedding that I had begged him not to tell anyone. Maybe that was my first mistake. Maybe I should have told Jimin everything before he found out about the wedding from someone else. Maybe I should have stopped him when he turned around and said, I hope she makes you happier than I ever could. Because Jimin wasn't just angry, he was hurt. Deeply hurt. And the worst part was that I knew exactly why. What none of us understood that night was that before the wedding could happen, one secret would come out, and it would force me to finally choose between protecting the person I loved and telling Jimin the truth that could change all of us forever. I need to take you back to where all of this started. Because if I begin with the wedding, you won't understand why Jimin looked at me that way. You won't understand why Taehyung kept warning me to stay quiet, or why the other members slowly started noticing that something was wrong with me. The wedding wasn't something I suddenly decided on. It started with a conversation I had months earlier, during a period when everything around us felt unusually busy. We were working, traveling, rehearsing, recording, and trying to keep some part of our normal lives untouched. I remember one night at the studio when everyone had already gone home except me, Jimin, and Taehyung. Jimin was sitting on the couch with his phone in his hand, scrolling through messages while Taehyung was standing near the window, staring outside. I was exhausted, but I didn't want to go home yet. There was something bothering me, although at that point I couldn't even explain what it was. Jimin suddenly looked at me and asked, "You're quiet today. What's wrong?" I smiled and said nothing. He immediately shook his head. "You always say that when something is wrong." I laughed because he knew me too well. That was Jimin. He noticed things I tried to hide. He could tell when I was tired even when I said I wasn't. He knew when I was nervous. Sometimes he even knew what I was about to say before I said it. I looked at him that night and felt something I didn't know how to explain. There was comfort between us that had been built over years, and maybe that's why what happened later hurt him so badly. Taehyung suddenly interrupted us. "JUNGKOOK, you should go home." I looked at him. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Jimin, then back at me. "Just trust me." Jimin frowned. "Why are you talking like that?" Taehyung smiled, but it wasn't his usual smile. It looked forced. "I'm not talking like anything." Jimin didn't believe him. Neither did I. That was the first time I realized Taehyung was hiding something from us. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it. A few days later, I received a message from someone I had been talking to privately. She wasn't famous. She wasn't connected to our work. She was just someone I had met unexpectedly, someone who had slowly become important to me without either of us planning for it. I won't tell you that I immediately knew she was the person I wanted to marry. I didn't. At first, I just liked talking to her. She made ordinary conversations feel easy. I could tell her when I had a bad day without worrying that she would judge me. Sometimes we'd talk about things that had nothing to do with music or work. She would ask what I wanted to do if I could disappear for 1 week and nobody knew where I was. I remember laughing and telling her I would probably sleep for 3 days. She said, "That's not a vacation. That's exhaustion." I still remember that because she was right. Little by little, I started looking for her messages. If something funny happened, she was the first person I wanted to tell. If I had a difficult day, I wanted to hear her voice. And when she didn't reply, I noticed. That scared me. I didn't want to become dependent on someone emotionally because I knew how complicated my life could be. So I kept telling myself it wasn't serious. Then one evening, Jin noticed me smiling at my phone during dinner. He leaned toward me and said, "Who is it?" I immediately put my phone down. "Nobody." Jin laughed. "That's definitely not nobody." RM looked over and smiled. Suga didn't even look up from his food. "Leave him alone." J-Hope laughed and said, "He's obviously hiding something." Everyone started teasing me, and I tried to change the subject. Jimin was sitting across from me. He didn't tease me. He just watched me quietly. I noticed that. I noticed the way his expression changed for a second before he looked down at his plate. At the time, I didn't understand what that look meant. I wish I had. A few weeks passed, and my relationship with her became closer. One night, she asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. Do you actually see a future with me? I didn't answer right away. I stared at the screen for almost a minute. I wanted to say yes, but I was scared of what that yes would mean. Eventually I typed, I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I don't want to lose you. She replied almost immediately. That's enough for me. I thought that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't. The next morning, Taeyoung called me. His voice sounded serious. We need to talk. I asked where he was. He told me to meet him somewhere private. When I arrived, he was already waiting. He didn't waste time. Jungkook, are you planning to marry her? I froze. How do you know about her? Taeyoung looked away. That's not the important part. Then what is? He took a breath and said, the important part is that Jimin knows something is happening. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? Taeyoung looked directly at me. It means you need to be careful. I asked him what he wasn't telling me, but he refused to answer. He only said one thing before leaving. If Jimin finds out the truth from someone else, he'll never forgive you. At that moment, I still thought the biggest problem was that Jimin might discover I was seeing someone. I didn't realize Taeyoung was talking about something much bigger. Something connected to the wedding. And something that would eventually make Jimin believe I had chosen someone else over him. After Taehyung left, I stayed there for a long time, trying to understand what he meant. I called him twice, but he didn't answer. I sent him a message asking what Jimin knew, and he only replied, not everything. That answer made me even more nervous. I knew Taehyung well enough to understand when he was avoiding something. He could joke about almost anything, but when he became quiet like that, there was usually a reason. I decided not to push him that night. I thought I could deal with it myself. Looking back, that was another mistake. The next day we had rehearsal. Everyone was there, but something felt different. Jimin was quieter than usual. Normally he would come over, ask me something random, or complain about how tired he was. That day he barely looked at me. I noticed it immediately. During a break, I walked over and sat beside him. Are you okay? I asked. He kept looking at his phone. I'm fine. I smiled slightly. You sound like me. He finally looked at me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he asked, are you seeing someone? My heart stopped for a moment. I didn't know what to say. Why are you asking? He looked away. Just answer me. I could have told him the truth right there. I could have said yes. I could have explained everything. But I remembered Taeyoung's warning, and instead I said, it's complicated. Jimin's face changed immediately. Complicated? I didn't mean no, it's okay. He stood up before I could finish. You don't have to explain anything to me. I watched him walk away. And I knew I had hurt him even though I hadn't intended to. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. I wondered why Jimin cared so much. I told myself he was worried about me. Maybe he was just being protective. Maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew there was something more. A few days later, Jimin stopped asking questions altogether. Somehow that hurt more. Silence from him was different. It wasn't peaceful. It felt like there were things sitting between us that neither of us wanted to touch. Taeyoung noticed it too. One evening, after everyone finished dinner, he pulled me aside. What happened between you and Jimin? I told him about our conversation. He closed his eyes for a second. You should have told him. I became frustrated. You told me to be careful. I told you to be careful, not to lie. I didn't lie. Taeyoung looked at me. Sometimes not telling the truth has the same effect. I didn't have an answer for that. Then he said something that made me angry. Jimin is already hurt. Why? I asked. What did I do? Taeyoung shook his head. That's what you don't understand. Then explain it. He stayed silent. Taeyoung, he finally looked at me. There are things Jimin never told you. I felt my chest tighten. What things? He walked away again. That became Taeyoung's habit during that period. He would give me just enough information to make me worry, then disappear before I could get an answer. I started wondering whether he was protecting Jimin or protecting me. Then the wedding conversation happened. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't some huge romantic moment. It was actually a quiet conversation between me and her in the backseat of a car after dinner. She looked nervous when she asked me, if we did this someday, would you really want it? I looked at her and knew what she was asking. Marriage. I took a long breath. I don't want to promise something just because it sounds good. She nodded. I know. I looked out the window, then back at her. But if I'm going to marry someone, I want it to be because I chose them when things were difficult too. She smiled, but her eyes became wet. Then maybe we should start planning. I laughed nervously. Planning what? The future. I remember that word clearly. Future. I wasn't ready for how serious it sounded. But I said yes. A few weeks later, we started quietly discussing what a wedding might look like. Nothing was finalized. There was no official announcement. But somehow the word began following me everywhere. And then Jimin found out. I still don't know exactly how. I only know that one afternoon I walked into the practice room and saw him standing near the table with his phone in his hand. Taehyung was there too. The moment I entered, both of them became silent. I looked at Jimin. What's wrong? He slowly put the phone down. You're getting married? I couldn't breathe for a second. Who told you that? His eyes immediately filled with emotion. So it's true. Jimin, wait. He laughed, but there was no happiness in it. Why did you ask who told me instead of saying no? I didn't know what to say. Taehyung stepped forward. Jimin listened to him. Jimin turned toward him. You knew? Taehyung said nothing. That silence was enough. Jimin looked back at me and I saw tears running down his face. Both of you knew I would be the last person to know. That's not true, I said. Then tell me the truth. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Jimin wiped his face quickly, almost embarrassed that we had seen him cry. I thought I mattered to you. Those words hit me harder than anything else. I stepped toward him, but he stepped back. Don't. His voice was shaking. Please don't make this harder. I wanted to tell him that the wedding wasn't what he thought. I wanted to explain why Taehyung had been hiding things. But Taehyung suddenly grabbed my arm and whispered, not here. Jimin heard him. He looked between us, and something in his expression changed. There it is, he said quietly. Another secret. Then he walked out. I followed him into the hallway, calling his name, but he didn't stop. And just before the elevator doors closed, he turned around and said something I will never forget. If you already chose someone else, JUNGKOOK, just let me go. The doors closed before I could answer. And standing there, I finally understood that Jimin wasn't angry about the wedding. He was afraid that he had already lost me. I stood in that hallway for several seconds after the elevator doors closed, staring at my own reflection in the metal because I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to run downstairs and stop Jimin, but my phone started ringing. It was Taehyung. I answered immediately. What were you thinking? I asked. He didn't respond for a moment. Then he said, you weren't supposed to tell him yet. I felt my anger rise. Tell him what, Taehyung? That I'm getting married? He already knows. That's not what I mean. Then tell me what you mean. He sighed. Not over the phone. I hung up. I was tired of secrets. I was tired of everyone knowing something except me. Most of all, I was tired of watching Jimin get hurt while nobody would tell me why. I went back to the apartment that night, but I couldn't settle down. I kept checking my phone, hoping Jimin would message me. Nothing. I finally sent him one message. Please talk to me. I waited. No response. I sent another. I don't want you to think you don't matter to me. Still nothing. I put my phone down and tried to sleep, but around 2 in the morning it lit up. I grabbed it immediately. It wasn't Jimin. It was Taehyung. Come alone. That's all he wrote. The next afternoon, I met him at a quiet cafe. He looked exhausted. I sat across from him and said, start talking. He stared at the table for a while before finally saying, Jimin has been trying to tell you something for a long time. My heart started beating faster. What? He was going to tell you months ago. Tell me what? Taehyung looked at me, that he had feelings for you. I couldn't speak. For a few seconds, everything around me seemed to disappear. The sound of cups, people talking, traffic outside, all of it became distant. What kind of feelings? I asked, even though I already knew what he meant. Taehyung didn't answer. He didn't have to. I leaned back in my chair and remembered every strange moment from the last few months. Jimin asking if I was seeing someone. Jimin watching me at dinner. Jimin becoming quiet whenever I talked about her. Jimin standing in that hallway with tears in his eyes. Suddenly, things I had dismissed started making sense. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered. Taehyung looked away. Because he was scared. Scared of me. I rubbed my hands together. Then why did you keep this from me? Taehyung took a deep breath. Because he asked me to. That surprised me. Jimin asked you? He nodded. He told me he didn't want you to feel pressured. He knew you were happy with her. He thought if he told you how he felt, you'd feel responsible for his feelings. I looked down at the table. For some reason, that hurt more than if Jimin had simply been angry with me. He had been carrying all of this alone. Taehyung continued. There was one night when Jimin almost told you. I looked up. When? The night at the studio. I remembered it immediately. The three of us had been there. Jimin had asked me if something was wrong. He had looked at me differently. Taehyung had told me to go home. Why did you stop him? I asked. Taehyung's expression became serious. Because he changed his mind. Why? Because you showed him a picture of her. I froze. I remembered showing Jimin a photo that night. I had been excited because she had sent me something funny. Jimin had looked at it for only a second before smiling and saying, "She looks nice." I didn't realize what that smile had cost him. Taehyung told me that after I left, Jimin stayed behind and cried. I closed my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Taehyung said, "Because Jimin didn't want you to know." I shook my head. "You should have told me anyway." "And what would you have done?" I didn't answer. That was the problem. I didn't know. Maybe I would have confronted Jimin. Maybe I would have tried to protect him. Maybe I would have questioned everything I thought I knew about us. But one thing became clear to me. I couldn't keep pretending this was only about a wedding. There was something unresolved between Jimin and me, something neither of us had been brave enough to name. I asked Taehyung one final question. "Does Jimin still feel that way?" Taehyung stared at me for a long time. "You should ask him yourself. He won't talk to me." "Then give him a reason to." I left the cafe with more questions than answers. That evening, RM noticed something was wrong with me. He sat beside me and asked, "Did something happen?" I hesitated. Jimin and I had an argument. RM didn't push immediately. He just nodded. After a few seconds, he said, "You know, sometimes people don't get angry because they hate you. Sometimes they're angry because they care too much." I looked at him. "What if I've already hurt him too badly?" RM replied, "Then don't make the mistake of deciding for him whether he can forgive you." Those words stayed with me. Later that night, Jin came into the room and tossed a bottle of water toward me. "You're thinking too much." I laughed weakly. "How do you know?" "Because you've been staring at the same wall for 10 minutes. I smiled, but then Jin became serious. "Whatever is happening with Jimin, don't leave things unsaid." I nodded. Meanwhile, Suga and J-Hope had noticed the tension too. Nobody knew the whole story, but everyone could tell something was wrong. J-Hope tried to lighten the mood, but even he eventually stopped joking when he saw how distracted I was. I realized then how much this situation had spread into everything. It wasn't just between Jimin and me anymore. Taehyung was carrying a secret. The members were watching us fall apart without understanding why. And I was preparing for a wedding while the person who had been closest to me for years was quietly breaking in front of me. That night, I finally decided I couldn't wait anymore. I called Jimin. He answered after several rings, but neither of us spoke. I could hear his breathing. Finally, I said, "Jimin, please don't hang up." He whispered, "What do you want?" I swallowed hard. "I want to understand." There was a long silence. Then he asked, "Understand what?" I closed my eyes. "Why you're hurting." His voice cracked. "You really don't know?" I wanted to say no. But somehow, after everything Taehyung had told me, I couldn't lie. "I think I know now." Jimin became completely silent. Then he said, "If you know JUNGKOOK, why are you still getting married?" I had no answer ready. Because the truth was, I had spent so much time trying to protect everyone that I had forgotten to ask myself what I actually wanted. And for the first time, I realized the wedding plans I had been treating as a simple decision were about to force me to face a feeling I had been avoiding for much longer than I wanted to admit. Jimin stayed silent on the phone, and I could hear his breathing getting heavier. I wanted to say something that would make everything easier, but there was nothing easy left to say. Finally, he asked again, "Why are you still getting married?" I looked down at my hands. "Because I made a promise." He laughed quietly, but there was pain in that laugh. "A promise to her?" "Yes." "Then what am I supposed to do with what I feel?" I closed my eyes. I had no answer. That was the moment I understood how unfair I had been to him. I had been thinking about my own fear, my own confusion, my own plans, but I hadn't stopped to think about what Jimin had been carrying. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't say that." His voice was quiet. "You don't get to apologize just because I finally told you how I feel. But I hurt you." "You did." Those two words were simple, but they hit me harder than anything else. I asked, "When did you start feeling this way?" He didn't answer immediately. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." He took a breath. "I don't even remember the exact day." "That's the problem. It happened slowly." I listened. "At first you were just someone I trusted. Then you became the person I looked for whenever something happened. When I was happy, I wanted to tell you. When I was upset, I wanted you around. Then one day I realized I was waiting for your messages. I was checking whether you had eaten. I was wondering where you were. And I knew I was in trouble. I couldn't speak." He continued, "But I never wanted you to feel trapped because of me." "Jimin, no. Let me finish." His voice shook. "I watched you become happy with her. I saw how you smiled when your phone lit up. I knew you were serious. So I decided I would keep quiet." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was scared that if I told you, I'd lose even the friendship we had." I whispered, "You almost did anyway." There was silence. Then Jimin said, "I know." That conversation ended without a solution. We didn't suddenly become a couple. I didn't suddenly cancel the wedding. Nothing became simple. But something had changed. For the first time, we were no longer pretending there was nothing between us. After the call, I stayed awake until morning. I thought about the woman I was supposed to marry. She had done nothing wrong. She had been honest with me. She had stood beside me when I was exhausted, listened to me when I couldn't sleep, and never asked me to become someone else. I couldn't treat her like she was part of a problem she didn't create. So I called her the next morning. She answered cheerfully, "You're awake early." I said, "Can we talk?" She immediately noticed my voice. "What's wrong?" I didn't know how to explain it. I finally said, "There is something I should have told you before we started making plans." She became quiet. "What is it?" I told her about Jimin. Not every detail, but enough for her to understand that my feelings were complicated. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked, "Do you love him?" I froze. That was the question I had been avoiding. "I don't know," I said honestly. She replied, "That's not the answer I was hoping for. I felt terrible. I'm sorry. Don't apologize yet. Just be honest with yourself." She took a breath. "Are you planning to marry me because you love me or because you're afraid of losing what we have?" I couldn't answer. She continued, "JUNGKOOK, I don't want a wedding where the person standing beside me is wondering if they should be somewhere else." Her words were painful because they were fair. I told her I needed time. She said, "Take it, but don't take forever." After the call, I went to the studio. Taeyong was already there. The moment he saw my face, he knew. "You talked to her." I nodded. "And I talked to Jimin." His expression changed. "What did he say?" "Everything." Taeyong sat down slowly. "Then you know why I tried to stop you." I looked at him. "No, I know why you were afraid." He didn't respond. I asked, "What else are you hiding?" Taeyong stared at the floor. "Nothing. Don't lie to me." He sighed. "There is one more thing." My chest tightened. "What?" He finally looked at me. "Jimin wasn't the only person who knew about your wedding plans." I waited. "Who else knew?" Taeyong hesitated. "Someone contacted Jimin before he found out from us." "Who?" Taeyong didn't answer. I stood up. "Taeyong." He said quietly, "She contacted him." I felt confused. "She did what?" "Your fiancé contacted Jimin." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Why?" Taeyong looked away. "Because she already knew about his feelings." I felt my stomach drop. Suddenly, the whole situation looked different. "How did she know?" Taeyong said, "I told her." I stared at him. "You told her?" He nodded. "Before you ask, I had a reason." "What reason could possibly justify that?" Taeyong's eyes became serious. "Because Jimin asked me to find out whether she knew how he felt about you." I couldn't move. Jimin had asked Taeyong to do that. Why? What had happened between them that I didn't know about? Taeyong continued, "She didn't react the way you think she did." "Then how did she react?" He looked directly at me. "She told Jimin something that he never told you." I felt my heart sink. "What did she say?" Taeyong hesitated for several seconds before answering. "She said she was willing to cancel the wedding if Jimin truly loved you." I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I understood had suddenly changed again. I had spent days thinking Jimin was trying to take something away from me. I had assumed Taeyong was protecting me from a difficult conversation. But now I was beginning to realize that everyone around me had been making decisions based on things they knew but I didn't. And there was one question I couldn't stop asking myself. If she was willing to walk away, why was I still holding on to the wedding? I didn't have the courage to answer that question yet. But I knew exactly who I needed to see next. Jimin. I found Jimin the following evening. He was alone, sitting in a quiet corner of the building with his phone in his hand, but he wasn't looking at the screen. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen him. I stood a few steps away and said his name. "Jimin." He looked up, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then he sighed. "You shouldn't be here." I walked closer. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About everything." He looked away. "There's nothing left to say." "There is." I sat across from him. "Taeyong told me she contacted you." His eyes immediately changed. "He told you?" I nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jimin stared at his hands. "Because I didn't want you to think I was trying to destroy your relationship." "Were you?" He shook his head quickly. "No." Then he became quiet again. "I never wanted you to choose me because you felt guilty." That sentence stayed between us. I asked, "What did she say to you?" Jimin took a long breath. "She asked me one question." "What question?" "She asked if I loved you enough to accept the consequences." I frowned. "What did you say?" He looked at me. I said I didn't know. I was surprised. "Why?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Because loving someone and being ready to change their entire life are two different things." I didn't expect that answer. Jimin continued, "I knew how complicated your life was. I knew how many people depended on you. I knew what a decision like that could do. So I told her I wouldn't ask you to leave her for me." I looked down. "Then why did you tell Taeyong about your feelings?" "Because I needed someone to know." I was scared I would eventually break. I could see how much he had been holding inside. For months he had been standing beside me, smiling, joking, acting normal, while knowing I was building a future with someone else. I asked him, "Why did you let me believe you were okay?" He answered immediately, "Because I wanted you to be happy, even if it hurt you, especially if it hurt me." I didn't know what to say. I moved closer. Jimin looked at me. He hesitated but finally did. "I need you to tell me something honestly." "What?" "If I canceled the wedding, would you want me?" His eyes filled with tears almost immediately. He looked away. "Don't ask me that." "Why?" "Because I don't want to be the reason you make a decision you'll regret." "That's not what I'm asking." "It is." He wiped his eyes. "You're asking me if I want you to choose me." "Of course I do. I've wanted that for longer than I should admit. But I don't want you to choose me because I caught you at a moment when you're confused." His honesty broke something inside me. I had spent so much time thinking about what I wanted that I had forgotten how much Jimin had tried to protect me from his own feelings. I reached for his hand, but he pulled it back. "Don't," he whispered. I stopped. "I'm sorry. That's exactly what I'm afraid of." "What?" "You keep looking at me like you're sorry." His voice became shaky. "I don't want your pity, Jungkook. It's not pity." "Then what is it?" I opened my mouth, but I couldn't answer. "Not yet." Because I was still afraid to say the words. Jimin stood up. "I need to go." I stood too. "Please wait." He shook his head. "I've already waited." That sentence destroyed me. He walked away, and this time I didn't chase him. I knew he needed space. But when I returned to the apartment, I found Taeyoung waiting for me. He was sitting quietly on the couch. "How did it go?" he asked. "Bad." Taeyoung nodded. "I figured him. You knew he would say that. I knew he was trying to protect you." "Why are you so determined to protect everyone?" Taeyoung gave me a strange look, because I know what happens when people say things too late. I sat beside him. "What are you talking about?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I made a mistake once. I waited. I kept a secret from someone because I thought I was protecting them. By the time I told the truth, it was too late." I realized Taeyoung wasn't talking about Jimin. He was talking about himself. "Who?" I asked. He shook his head. "That's not important. It is if you're using that mistake to decide what happens between me and Jimin." He looked at me and said, "Maybe you're right." Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen and immediately became tense. "Who is it?" I asked. "Nobody, Taeyoung." He stood up and walked toward the window. He answered the call quietly. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard one sentence clearly. "No, he doesn't know yet." My heart sank. When he ended the call, I asked, "Who was that?" He didn't answer. "What don't I know?" He finally turned around. "The wedding date." I froze. "What about it?" "It was moved to when?" Taeyoung looked at me. 2 weeks from now." I stared at him. "I never agreed to that." "I know." "Then who changed it?" He didn't answer. I stepped closer. "Taeyoung, who changed the wedding date?" He looked at me with an expression that made my stomach tighten. "She did." I couldn't understand. Why would she move the wedding? Taeyoung lowered his voice. "Because she believes you're still going to marry her." I shook my head. "But I told her I needed time." "She knows. Then why?" Taeyoung hesitated before saying, "Because she thinks you're going to choose Jimin." I felt the room become silent. "How does she know that?" Taeyoung looked away. "Because Jimin told her." My heart dropped. Jimin had told her something. Something I hadn't heard. Something that could explain why she suddenly wanted to move the wedding forward. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether the wedding wasn't just a plan anymore. Maybe it had become a deadline. A deadline that would force all of us to finally reveal what we had been hiding. 2 weeks. That's what Taeyoung told me. And for the rest of that night, those words kept repeating in my head. 2 weeks until the wedding. 2 weeks until I had to make a decision that I had been avoiding for months. I barely slept. At around 3 in the morning, I finally got up and walked into the kitchen. The apartment was quiet, but RM was already there drinking water. He looked at me and immediately knew I wasn't okay. "You look terrible," he said. I laughed quietly. "Thanks." He smiled. "You know what I mean." I leaned against the counter. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "If you knew you were going to hurt someone no matter what you chose, how would you decide?" RM thought about it for a moment. "I'd stop thinking about who gets hurt first and ask myself which choice is honest." I looked down. "What if the honest choice hurts more people? Then you still have to make it." He took another sip of water. Avoiding a decision doesn't make the consequences disappear. I knew he was right. The next morning I called her. She answered after a few rings. "Did you sleep?" "Not really." She was quiet. "Taeyoung told you about the date." "Yes." "I'm sorry." "Why did you move it?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. "Because I was scared of what? Of losing you." I closed my eyes. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." Her voice sounded tired. "But every time you said you needed more time, I started feeling like I was waiting for someone else to make the decision for you. I couldn't argue with that. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. She took a breath. But knowing that doesn't make it hurt less. There was a long silence between us. Then she said, I need you to answer one question. What? If Jimin had never told you how he felt, would you still marry me? I couldn't answer immediately. She noticed. That's what I thought. I felt a tightness in my chest. I'm trying to understand what I really feel. Then do it quickly. Her voice broke slightly. Because I can't keep standing between your past and your future. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. She wasn't wrong. She deserved certainty. Jimin deserved honesty. And I deserved to stop pretending I didn't know what my heart was trying to tell me. But there was another problem. I still didn't know why Taeyong had been involved in all of this from the beginning. That afternoon, I found him alone. We need to talk. He nodded. I know. Why did you tell her about Jimin? He didn't avoid the question this time, because she asked me. Why did she ask you? Because she knew something was wrong between you and Jimin. I stared at him. How? She noticed. I shook my head. That doesn't explain everything. Taeyong looked down. Jimin told her himself. When? After you told him about the wedding plans. I felt confused. Why would he contact her? Because he wanted to know if she really loved you. I was silent. Taeyong continued. He thought maybe she was rushing the wedding because she was afraid of losing you. He wanted to know whether she was serious about building a life with you. I couldn't believe Jimin had done that. He had been hurt, but he still wanted to make sure the person I chose was genuine. What did she tell him? I asked. She told him she loved you. I looked away, and then she asked him if he loved you. What did he say? He said yes. My throat tightened. Then what happened? Taeyong paused. She told him that if you ever chose him, she would step aside. I closed my eyes. And that's when the wedding date changed? Yes. Why? Taeyong looked at me. Because she realized she could lose you. I didn't know whether to feel angry or sad. None of this was simple anymore. That evening, I went to see Jimin again. He was in the practice room, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. He looked up when I entered. Why are you here? I sat a few feet away. Because I have a question. He sighed. What now? Did you contact her? His face became tense. Taeyong told you. Yes. Jimin looked down. I did. Why? I needed to know if she was serious about you. Why did you care? He looked at me. Because I care about you. I felt my chest tighten. Even after everything, especially after everything, I didn't understand him. You were willing to help me marry someone else? His eyes filled with tears. If she made you happy, yes. Even if it destroyed you, I thought I could handle it. Could you? He laughed softly. No, I moved closer. Then why? Jimin wiped his face. Because loving you doesn't mean I get to own your future. I couldn't look away from him. Jimin, I know what you're going to say. You don't. You're going to tell me you're confused. He smiled sadly. I know you're confused because I'm confused too. I shook my head. No. I'm starting to understand. His expression changed. Understand what? I took a breath. Why it hurt so much when you stopped talking to me. He looked at me silently. Why I kept checking my phone when you didn't message me. Why I noticed every time you walked out of a room. Why I couldn't stand seeing you cry because of me. Jimin's lips trembled. Don't say things you don't mean. I mean them. Then say what you're trying to say. I couldn't. Not yet. The words were there, but fear stopped me. Jimin stood up. You still have a wedding in 2 weeks. I nodded. I know. Then don't make promises to me until you're sure. He walked toward the door, but before he left, he stopped. And JUNGKOOK? Yeah? He turned around. If you're going to choose me, don't choose me because you're afraid of losing me. Choose me because you can't imagine your life without me. Then he left. I stayed alone in that room, staring at the door. For the first time, I knew exactly what I had to do. But before I could make that decision, Taeyong sent me a message that made my hands go cold. You need to see what Jimin found. I called Taeyong immediately after reading the message, but he didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I stared at the screen, wondering what Jimin could possibly have found that was serious enough for Taeyong to warn me about. For a moment, I thought about going straight to Jimin, but then another message arrived. It was from him. Come to the old studio, alone. My hands went cold. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I went. When I arrived, the lights were mostly off. Jimin was sitting near the mixing desk with a small envelope in his hand. He looked up when I entered. You came? Of course I came. What's going on? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he held out the envelope. I found this in Taeyong's things. I frowned. Why were you looking through his things? I wasn't. He paused. He left it in the practice room. I took the envelope. There was no name on it. What's inside? Jimin looked at me. Open it. I pulled out several printed pages. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the date. It was from months earlier. There were messages between Taeyoung and the woman I was planning to marry. My heart started beating faster. Why were they talking? Jimin shook his head. Keep reading. I scanned the messages. Most of them were ordinary at first. They talked about me, about my schedule, about whether I was okay. Then I saw one sentence that made me stop. He still doesn't know how Jimin feels. I looked at Jimin. You knew about this? Not until today. I kept reading. Taeyoung had been telling her about my relationship with Jimin. He had been explaining things Jimin had never told me. But there was something else. A message from her said if he ever realizes what Jimin means to him, the wedding won't happen. I looked up. What does that mean? Jimin's face became pale. That's what I wanted to know. I kept reading. Another message appeared. Then we have to make sure he believes the wedding is the right choice before he figures it out. My stomach dropped. She was manipulating me? Jimin shook his head. I don't know. Then why would she say this? Maybe there is something we're missing. I continued reading. Then I saw Taeyoung's response. I won't let you hurt him. If you're serious about him, tell him the truth. Her reply was simple. I can't. Not yet. I stared at the page. Suddenly, I didn't know what to believe. I looked at Jimin. Did Taeyoung know about this? I think so. And he never told me? Jimin shook his head. That's why I asked you to come here. I sat down. My head was spinning. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Jimin looked at me with tired eyes. Because I didn't know whether these messages were complete. What do you mean? There are missing pages. I looked at the envelope. How many? I don't know. Then where are they? Jimin shook his head. That's what Taeyoung knows. Before I could respond, the studio door opened. Taeyoung walked in. He stopped when he saw the papers in my hand. His face changed immediately. Where did you get those? I stood up. You tell me. He looked at Jimin. You weren't supposed to find that. Jimin stood too. Why? Taeyoung didn't answer. Why were you talking to her? Jimin demanded. Taeyoung looked at me. Because I was trying to protect you. I became angry. Everyone keeps saying that. I'm tired of hearing it. Taeyoung took a breath. Then listened to the whole story. He sat down and rubbed his face. She contacted me first. She was worried about you. I frowned. About me? Yes. She told me she knew you cared about Jimin more deeply than you admitted. Jimin looked down. Then why didn't she leave? Taeyoung answered quietly. Because she believed you could still love her. I felt confused. And you agreed with her at first. What changed? Taeyoung looked at me. I saw how you reacted every time Jimin was hurt. I didn't speak. You didn't realize it, Taeyoung continued. But whenever Jimin was upset, you stopped thinking about everything else. You always went after him. You always checked whether he was okay. You always noticed when he was missing. I shook my head. That's because he's my friend. Taeyoung gave me a sad smile. Maybe that's what you told yourself. Jimin looked at me, but I couldn't meet his eyes. Taeyoung continued, I didn't want to interfere. I thought eventually you'd figure it out yourself. Then why hide the messages? Because she asked me to. I stared at him. Why would you agree? Taeyoung looked down. Because she told me something that scared me. What? He hesitated. She said Jimin was planning to leave. Jimin looked shocked. What? Taeyoung continued. She told me Jimin had been offered an opportunity abroad and was considering taking it. I looked at Jimin. Is that true? He didn't answer. My heart started racing. Jimin, he finally whispered. Yes. I felt like the room had suddenly become smaller. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know if I was going. When? After the wedding. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You were going to leave after my wedding? Jimin's eyes filled with tears. I thought it would be easier. Easier for who? For me. I stared at him. You were going to disappear from my life. I thought I had to. Why? His voice broke. Because watching you build a life with someone else was killing me. I looked away. For months I had been worrying about losing the woman I planned to marry, while Jimin had been quietly preparing to leave because he couldn't bear watching me move on. Suddenly, the wedding didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a deadline that had been pushing all of us toward a decision. Then Taeyoung pulled another sheet from his pocket. There's one more message. He handed it to me. I read it once, then again. It was from her. If JUNGKOOK chooses Jimin, I'll let him go. But if he chooses me, Jimin needs to know the real reason I agreed to marry him. I looked up slowly. What real reason? Taeyoung didn't answer. Jimin looked at him too. Tell him, Jimin said. Taeyoung closed his eyes. I can't. I stepped toward him. You can. And you will. He finally looked at me. The wedding wasn't supposed to happen because she wanted to marry you. He paused. It was supposed to happen because she believed getting married would protect you from something that was about to come out. I felt my stomach drop. Protect me from what? Taeyoung looked at Jimin, then back at me. From a secret that Jimin has been carrying since before any of this started. Jimin's face went completely pale. I turned toward him. What secret? He didn't answer. And that silence told me the next truth was going to hurt more than the wedding ever could. I looked at Jimin, but he couldn't look back at me. For the first time since I had known him, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not anger, not sadness, fear. I turned to Taeyoung. What secret? Taeyoung shook his head. You should hear it from Jimin. I looked back at him. Jimin? He stayed silent. I stepped closer. Please. He finally sat down and covered his face with both hands. I didn't want you to find out like this. My voice became softer. He slowly lowered his hands. His eyes were already red. Before you met her, I had already made a decision. What decision? I was going to leave. I felt my chest tighten. You already said that. No, he whispered. I mean, I was going to leave everything. I didn't understand. What does that mean? He took a shaky breath. I was going to stop working for a while. I was going to go somewhere nobody knew me. I wanted to disappear. I stared at him. Why? He looked down. Because I thought staying close to you was making everything worse. I shook my head. How? Because I couldn't control how I felt. His voice cracked. Every time you talked about her, I smiled. Every time you told me you were happy, I said I was happy for you. But when I went home, I couldn't sleep. I didn't know what to say. Jimin continued, I started avoiding you because I thought distance would fix it. It didn't. It only made me miss you more. I sat beside him. Then what happened? Taehyung found out. I looked at Taehyung. He nodded. He came to me one night. He asked why I was packing. I looked at Jimin again. You were actually going to leave? Yes. Without telling me? I wrote you a letter. My heart stopped. A letter? Jimin nodded. I never gave it to you. Where is it? He looked for the table. There was another envelope there. My name was written on it. I stared at it for several seconds before picking it up. My hands were shaking. Why didn't you give me this? Jimin whispered. Because I was afraid of what you'd say. I opened it carefully. The first line made my throat tighten. I don't know if you'll ever understand why I'm leaving. I stopped reading. I couldn't continue. Jimin watched me. Keep going. I looked down again. The letter wasn't romantic in the way I expected. It was honest. Jimin wrote about feeling lost, about being afraid that his feelings would ruin our friendship, about watching me move forward while he stayed behind. He wrote that he didn't blame me. He wrote that he didn't blame her. He blamed himself for waiting too long to admit what he wanted. Then I reached the final part. If one day you realize that I was the person you were looking for, please don't come after me. I want you to be happy, even if that happiness has nothing to do with me. I couldn't breathe. I folded the letter and looked at him. You really planned to leave me. Tears ran down his face. I thought I had to. You should have told me. I was scared. You keep saying that because it's true. I stared at him. And the wedding? Jimin looked away. When I found out you were planning to marry her, I decided I would leave after the wedding. Why after? Because I didn't want to ruin your happiness before it happened. I felt angry, but not at him. I was angry at myself. All this time I had been thinking Jimin was simply hurt because I was getting married. I hadn't realized he had already made plans to remove himself from my life completely. I asked, what did she know? Jimin hesitated. She knew I was leaving. I looked at him. How? Taehyung told her. I turned toward Taehyung. Why? Taehyung looked exhausted. Because I thought she deserved to know what was happening. And that's why she moved the wedding? He nodded. She was afraid that if Jimin left, you'd eventually realize what you felt for him. I shook my head. So she wanted to marry me before that happened? Not exactly. Taehyung looked at me. She wanted you to make a choice while Jimin was still here. I didn't understand. Why? Because she believed you had to choose while both options were real. She didn't want you to choose Jimin simply because he disappeared. I sat there silently. For the first time, I understood that even she wasn't simply trying to trap me. She was scared too. She had seen something in me that I hadn't been willing to see. I asked Jimin, why did you tell her you would leave? Because she asked me what I would do if you chose her. And what did you say? I said I would disappear. I closed my eyes. Why didn't you fight for me? He looked at me. Because I thought you were already happy. That sentence hurt. What if I wasn't? Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Then you should have told me. I looked at him. That's exactly what I'm doing now. He became silent. I took a breath. I'm saying I know everything. I'm not saying I can fix this in one night. But I know one thing now. He waited. I don't want you to leave. Jimin's lips trembled. JUNGKOOK? No, let me finish. I moved closer. I spent so much time worrying about the wedding, about what everyone would think, about hurting her, about what Taehyung knows, that I forgot to ask myself the most important question. Jimin whispered, what question? I looked directly into his eyes. Who do I want beside me when nobody else is watching? He didn't answer. I didn't expect him to, because I wasn't ready to say the answer out loud yet. Then my phone started ringing. It was her. I stared at the screen. Jimin looked at it too, he whispered. I did. Her voice was calm, but I could hear that she had been crying. "Jungkook, we need to talk." "I know," she said. "You don't know yet." I felt my chest tighten. "What don't I know?" There was a long pause. Then she said, "The wedding isn't the only thing I planned." I stood up. "What does that mean?" Her voice became quieter. "There is something I need to show you before you make your decision." I asked where she was. She gave me an address. Before hanging up, she said one final thing. "Come alone, and please don't tell Jimin." I looked at Jimin after the call ended. He immediately knew something had happened. What did she say? I couldn't answer. Because whatever she wanted to show me could change everything I thought I knew about the wedding, about Taehyung, and maybe even about why she had stayed with me when she knew my heart was already beginning to move somewhere else. I didn't want to go alone, but I also knew I couldn't ignore her. I told Jimin I needed to handle something and promised I would come back. He didn't ask me to stay, he just nodded, and somehow that hurt more than if he had argued with me. On the way there, I kept thinking about what she had said. The wedding isn't the only thing I planned. I couldn't understand what that meant. When I arrived at the address, I found her waiting outside a small office building. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. "Tell me what's going on." She opened the door. Inside was a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and several boxes. She pointed toward the table. "Sit down." I didn't. "I'd rather stand." She gave a small smile. "You really are nervous." "I have a reason." She nodded. "You do." Then she took a folder from one of the boxes and placed it on the table. "Before you open this, I need you to know something." I waited. "I never wanted to trap you." I looked at her. "Then why did you move the wedding?" "Because I thought you were going to lose the chance to understand what you really wanted." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense." She looked down. "It will." She opened the folder herself. Inside were photographs, messages, and documents. Some of them were from months ago. "What is all this?" I asked. "Everything I learned before I agreed to marry you." I picked up one photograph. It showed Jimin standing outside a building late at night. Another showed Taehyung talking to someone I didn't recognize. I looked at her. "Why were you investigating them?" "I wasn't investigating them. I was trying to understand what was happening around you." She pointed to a document. This was the opportunity Jimin was considering. I read it carefully. It was an offer for a long-term project overseas. The date was months earlier. He really was going to leave. She nodded. "Yes." Then she showed me another message. It was from Jimin. "I don't want Jungkook to know. If he knows, he'll try to stop me." My chest tightened. "Why did you have this?" "He sent it to me." I looked at her in disbelief. "Why would he send it to you?" "Because he wanted me to understand that he wasn't trying to take you away from me." I sat down. "Then why didn't you tell me?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Because I promised him I wouldn't." I was stunned. "You both made decisions about my life without me." "I know." Her voice broke. "And I'm sorry." I looked through the folder again. Then I found something that made me stop. It was a handwritten note. My name was on it. "What's this?" She didn't answer. I opened it. It was from Jimin. But it wasn't the letter I had already seen. This one was shorter. "If Jungkook ever finds out about everything, tell him I never wanted him to choose me because I was hurting. I only wanted him to be honest with himself." I closed my eyes. "He gave you this when?" "The day before he planned to leave." I looked at her. "And you stopped him?" She shook her head. "No, I couldn't stop him." "Then why is he still here?" She smiled sadly. "Because you gave him a reason to stay." I didn't understand. "What did I do?" "You loved him enough to let him choose." I looked away. She continued, "I realized something after I met Jimin. He wasn't trying to destroy our relationship. He was trying to protect you from making a decision because of him." I felt my throat tighten. "Then why did you still want to marry me?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I loved you." That answer was simple. But I also knew love wasn't enough if you weren't choosing me freely. She sat across from me. "That's why I moved the wedding date. Not because I wanted to force you. I wanted to stop waiting for a decision that you kept postponing." I nodded slowly. "And what happens now?" She took a breath. "Now you decide." I looked at her. "What if I choose Jimin?" She smiled sadly. "Then I will be hurt." She paused. "But I'll survive." I felt tears in my eyes. "I'm sorry, I know." Then she looked at me seriously. "But if you choose me, I need one promise." "What promise?" "Never make me compete with him again." I understood. She didn't want a marriage built on comparison. She wanted certainty. I stood up. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I think I already know my answer." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Then go tell him." I couldn't believe she was letting me walk away. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes." I thanked her and left. On the way back, I called Taehyung. He answered immediately. "Where are you?" "Going to see Jimin." "It's time." "Time for what?" "For me to tell you the last part." I stopped walking. What last part? Taeyong said. The reason I was so afraid of you finding out about Jimin's feelings isn't because I thought you'd choose him. I waited. I was afraid you'd realize you had already chosen him a long time ago. My heart started pounding. Taehyung, think about it, JUNGKOOK. Who did you look for when you were happy? Who did you call when you were scared? Who did you forgive without being asked? Who did you keep going back to even when you were angry? I didn't answer. I already knew. Jimin, Taehyung said quietly. It was always Jimin. I hung up and stood there for a moment, unable to move. Then I finally understood why the wedding announcement had affected me so differently than I expected. I had thought I was afraid of losing my future. But maybe I had been afraid of admitting that the future I wanted had never looked the way I told myself it did. I arrived at the building where Jimin was waiting. He was standing alone near the window. When he saw me, he immediately looked nervous. What happened? He asked. I walked toward him. I talked to her. He nodded. And I took a deep breath. The wedding is canceled. Jimin froze. What? I canceled it. His eyes filled with tears. Why? I stepped closer. Because I finally stopped asking myself who I should choose. He looked at me. Then what did you ask? I swallowed hard. Who I can't imagine losing. Jimin's lips trembled. JUNGKOOK. I reached for his hand. This time he didn't pull away. But before I could say what I had been trying to say for months, Jimin whispered something that made me realize our story wasn't finished yet. There's one thing you still don't know. When Jimin said, there's one thing you still don't know, I felt my whole body tense. After everything we had already uncovered, I honestly didn't know what else could possibly be hidden. I looked at him and asked, what is it? He kept holding my hand, but his fingers were shaking. The reason I almost left wasn't only because I loved you. I frowned. Then what was it? He looked down. Because I thought you were happier without me. I didn't understand. Why would you think that? He gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Because every time I tried to get closer, you were already moving towards someone else. I thought maybe I was the problem. I shook my head. You were never the problem. You don't know that. I do now. He looked at me. I took a breath and finally said the words I had been afraid to say for so long. I love you, Jimin. He froze. I could see tears immediately forming in his eyes. I continued before fear could stop me. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it happened so slowly that I didn't notice. Maybe I was too comfortable calling it friendship because that was easier. But when you started pulling away, I couldn't handle it. When you cried because of me, I felt like I had failed you. When you told me you were going to leave, I realized the idea of waking up and knowing you weren't in my life anymore scared me more than anything. Jimin looked away, crying silently. I gently squeezed his hand. I should have realized sooner. I should have asked you what you were feeling instead of assuming I knew. I should have told you the truth before the wedding plans became something that hurt you. I'm sorry. He finally looked back at me. Do you mean it? Yes. Even after everything. Especially after everything. He laughed through his tears. You're so late. I smiled sadly. I know. He shook his head. I waited so long to hear that. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. He wiped his face. Just stay. Those 2 words were enough. I pulled him into a hug, and for the first time in months, neither of us was trying to hide what we felt. There was no argument. No secret, no explanation, just relief. But I knew we couldn't pretend everything would suddenly be easy. There was still Taehyung, there were still the other members. There were still questions about what would happen next. When we returned, RM was the first person we saw. He looked at us, then at our hands, and immediately smiled. So he said, you finally talked. I laughed. Something like that. Jin came over and looked between us. Does this mean the wedding is cancelled? I nodded. He let out a long breath. Good. Because planning 2 weddings at once would have been exhausting. Everyone laughed, including Jimin. It was the first real laugh I had heard from him in a long time. Suga looked at us and simply said, took you long enough. J-Hope smiled and hugged Jimin. Are you okay? Jimin nodded. I think so. Then Taehyung walked in. He stopped when he saw us. For a second, nobody spoke. Then he smiled. So you know? I nodded. Everything. He looked at Jimin. Are you angry with me? Jimin shook his head. A little laughed. Fair. I stepped toward him. You made this much harder than it needed to be. He nodded. I know. Why didn't you just tell me? He looked at me seriously. Because sometimes people aren't ready to hear the truth until they reach it themselves. I understood what he meant. I didn't have to agree with how he handled everything, but I understood why he had been afraid. Jimin walked over to him. Thank you. Taehyung looked surprised. For what? For staying when I wanted to leave. Taehyung smiled. Someone had to make sure you didn't disappear. That moment made me realize how much Taehyung had actually been carrying. He wasn't trying to create drama for the sake of it. He was scared too. He had watched both of us avoid the truth, and tried to keep everything from collapsing. He made mistakes, but he never stopped caring about us. A few days later, I officially ended the wedding plans. It wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations, uncomfortable explanations, and moments when I questioned whether I had made the right decision. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered Jimin's face when he asked me to stay. I knew I had made the honest choice. I also made sure the woman I had been planning to marry was treated with respect. She deserved that. She wasn't my enemy. She had loved me sincerely, and I would always be grateful for that. We eventually said goodbye without anger. She told me, "I hope you find what you were looking for." I told her, "I hope you do too." And that was the end of that chapter. With Jimin, things didn't become perfect overnight. We had to learn how to talk differently. We had to learn how to say what we wanted instead of expecting the other person to understand. Sometimes we still misunderstood each other. Sometimes one of us became quiet because we were afraid. But now, instead of walking away, we talked. That's what changed everything. One night, months after the wedding plans had ended, Jimin and I were sitting together after everyone else had gone to sleep. He looked at me and asked, "Do you remember when you told everyone you were getting married?" I laughed. Unfortunately, he smiled. I thought my heart was going to stop. "I know. I thought I lost you." I looked at him. "You almost did." He became quiet. "But you didn't." I shook my head. "No, I didn't." He leaned against my shoulder. Why I took his hand? Because I finally understood that the person I was afraid of losing had been beside me the entire time. He smiled. "That sounds like something you rehearsed." I laughed. "I didn't." "Good." He squeezed my hand. "Because I like you better when you're honest." I smiled. Looking back, I understand why people sometimes delay the words that matter most. We're afraid of changing things. We're afraid of rejection. We're afraid that saying what we feel will destroy something we've spent years protecting. But silence can hurt too. Sometimes more than the truth. My wedding plans became something completely different from what everyone expected. They became the moment that forced me to stop hiding from my own feelings. Jimin thought he had lost me. I thought I was protecting everyone. Taehyung thought he was protecting us from the truth. And somehow, after all the confusion, we finally ended up where we were supposed to be. I don't know what the future will look like. I don't want to pretend I do. But now, when I think about the person standing beside me, I don't think about promises made because I'm afraid. I think about choosing someone because I genuinely want them there. And that's what the wedding taught me. Sometimes the biggest decision isn't about who you're supposed to marry. It's about finally admitting who your heart has been choosing all along. And if I'm honest, mine had been choosing Jimin long before I was brave enough to say his name that way. I thought telling Jimin how I felt would be the hardest part, but I was wrong. The harder part came afterward. Choosing each other didn't suddenly erase everything that had happened before. There were still questions. There were still moments when Jimin looked at me and seemed afraid that I might change my mind. And there were nights when I woke up and remembered how close I had come to losing him without even realizing it. I understood why he was careful. For months, he had watched me make plans with someone else while hiding his feelings. I couldn't expect him to trust everything overnight just because I had finally said I loved him. So I stopped asking him to believe my words and started showing him through what I did. I called him when I said I would. I told him where I was going instead of disappearing. If something bothered me, I talked about it. If I was scared, I admitted it. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes Jimin would become quiet, and the old version of me would have assumed he wanted space. Now I would sit beside him and ask, "What's going on?" Sometimes he would say, "Nothing," and I'd smile and answer, "You're using my old answer." He would laugh, and eventually he would tell me. Those small moments became more important to me than any big romantic gesture. One evening, the six of us were sitting together after a long schedule. Jin was complaining about being hungry, J-Hope was trying to decide what everyone should order, RM was reading something on his phone, and Suga was pretending not to listen to anyone. Taehyung was unusually quiet. I looked at him and said, "You're thinking about something." He raised an eyebrow. "Why do you always assume that?" "Because you're terrible at hiding it." Jimin laughed beside me. Taehyung looked at both of us and smiled. "I'm just glad you two finally stopped making everything complicated." Suga immediately said, "They made it complicated. You made it worse." Everyone laughed. Taehyung pointed at him. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," Suga replied. Jimin laughed so hard that he leaned against my shoulder. I looked at him and realized how different that moment felt from the night he had cried in front of me. Back then, I thought I was watching someone I cared about fall apart. Now I was watching him laugh because he finally felt safe enough to stop pretending. Later that night, after everyone had left, Jimin and I stayed behind for a few minutes. He asked, "Do you ever regret canceling the wedding?" I knew exactly what he was asking. I answered honestly, "I regret hurting her." He nodded. "Me too, but I don't regret being honest." He looked at me. "Even if it changed everything, especially because it changed everything." He smiled quietly. "I was scared you would regret choosing me. I was scared too." "You?" He laughed. "You always look so confident." I shook my head. "That's just what people see." He looked at me for a moment. "I know." Then he reached for my hand. "That's why I stayed." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Because I knew there was more to you than what everyone saw." I didn't answer. I just held his hand tighter. There was another thing I had to learn. Love isn't only about finally getting the person you want. Sometimes it's about accepting the responsibility that comes with being chosen. Jimin had taken a risk by staying. I had taken a risk by choosing him. We both had something to lose. But this time we weren't running from that fear. We were facing it together. Taeyoung eventually apologized to both of us for keeping so many secrets. Jimin forgave him faster than I did. I needed more time. Not because I hated him, but because I wanted him to understand how much damage secrecy could cause. One night, Taeyoung and I talked alone. He said, "You know what the worst part was?" I asked. "What?" "I knew you loved him before you did." I laughed. "You could have told me." He smiled. "You wouldn't have listened." He was probably right. Sometimes people can tell you the truth 100 times, but until you're ready to accept it, it doesn't mean anything. Months passed, life became normal again. Schedules, rehearsals, flights, late dinners, stupid jokes, arguments about food, and long nights when everyone was too tired to talk. But there was one thing that never went back to the way it was before. Jimin and I stopped hiding from each other. One night, I found him standing near a window, looking outside. I walked over and stood beside him. "What are you thinking about?" He smiled. "The wedding." I laughed. "Again?" "Yeah." He turned toward me. "Do you remember what you said when you canceled it?" "Not exactly." "You said you finally knew who you couldn't imagine losing." I nodded. "I remember." He looked down at his hands. "Do you still feel that way?" I didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." He smiled. "Good." I asked. "Why?" He looked at me and said, "Because I don't want to spend another year wondering I understood what he meant. We had already wasted enough time being afraid." I reached for his hand. "Then don't wonder." He looked at me. "What are you saying?" I smiled. "I'm saying that if someday I talk about marriage again, I don't want you hearing about it from someone else." His eyes widened slightly. "JUNGKOOK." I laughed. "I'm not proposing right now." He pushed my shoulder. "You scared me. I just wanted you to know." He smiled and leaned against me. "Then I'll wait." "For what?" "For the day you're ready." I looked down at him. "I think I'm closer than you think." He didn't answer. He just smiled. And maybe that's where our story really changed. Not because of the wedding that almost happened, but because after everything, we finally understood that love wasn't supposed to feel like a deadline. It wasn't supposed to be a secret. It wasn't supposed to be something one person carried alone while the other remained unaware. It was supposed to be a choice we could make every day. And if you ask me now what I learned from all of it, I'd say this. I spent months believing the wedding was the biggest decision of my life. It wasn't. The biggest decision was finally being honest about who I wanted beside me when the noise disappeared, when there were no cameras, no expectations, no opinions from anyone else. Just me, Jimin, and the truth. And when I finally faced that truth, I realized I hadn't really been choosing between two futures. I had been choosing between fear and honesty. This time, I chose honesty. After that night, something between Jimin and me became quieter, but in a good way. We didn't need to keep asking where we stood anymore. We knew. There were still difficult days, of course. There were days when our schedules were impossible, days when one of us was too tired to talk, and days when old fears came back without warning. But whenever that happened, we didn't run. That was the biggest difference. We talked. Sometimes the conversations were short. Sometimes they lasted for hours. And sometimes all Jimin needed was for me to sit beside him without trying to fix anything. I learned that about him. He didn't always need an answer. Sometimes he just needed to know I wasn't leaving. One evening after a long day, we were sitting together in the car while the rain hit the windows. Jimin looked outside for a while before saying, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I actually left?" I looked at him all the time. "What would you have done?" I thought about it. "I don't know." He smiled sadly. "That's an honest answer, but I know what I would do now." He turned toward me. "What?" "I would come after you." He looked down and I saw the small smile on his face. "You really mean that?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I wish you had said that months ago." I laughed softly. "Me too." He leaned his head against the seat. "Maybe we needed to go through all of it. Maybe. Even the wedding?" I smiled. "Especially the wedding," he laughed. That's still the strangest part of this whole story. I know. I looked out the window. Everyone thought I was announcing my future. Jimin looked at me. But you were actually about to lose it. I nodded. Exactly. The rain continued, and for some reason that moment stayed with me. Because the wedding that had once represented certainty became the thing that exposed how uncertain I really was. It forced me to question what I wanted, instead of simply following what seemed right. It forced Jimin to finally speak instead of suffering quietly. It forced Taeyoung to stop hiding things. It forced the people around us to realize that sometimes the person who looks calm is actually the one struggling the most. And it taught me something I don't think I'll ever forget. You can love someone and still hurt them. You can have good intentions and still make terrible choices. You can protect someone so much that you end up keeping them from the truth they need. I made all of those mistakes. Jimin did too. Taeyoung definitely did. But none of us were trying to destroy each other. We were just afraid. Afraid of losing people. Afraid of making the wrong choice. Afraid of saying something we couldn't take back. And maybe that's why I understand Jimin more now than I ever did before. He wasn't weak when he cried. He wasn't being dramatic when he asked me to let him go. He was trying to protect himself from watching someone he loved choose another person. When I think about that night in the hallway, I still remember his face. I remember the way he said, "If you already chose someone else, just let me go." At the time, I thought he was asking me to leave him alone. Now I understand what he was really saying. He was asking me not to keep him waiting for something I wasn't sure I could give him. And I'm glad I finally understood. Because nobody should have to live inside someone else's uncertainty. Jimin deserved an answer. The woman I was planning to marry deserved an answer. And I deserved to stop lying to myself. Months later, I asked Jimin to meet me at the same place where we had first talked about everything. He arrived and looked at me suspiciously. "Why did you ask me to come here?" I smiled. "Because I have something to say." He laughed. "That sounds dangerous." "Maybe." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box. His expression immediately changed. "JUNGKOOK, wait," I laughed. "Don't panic." He stared at the box. "What is that?" I opened it. Inside wasn't a ring, it was a small key. Jimin looked confused. "A key?" I nodded. "It's for the apartment." He stared at me. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I don't want you to ever feel like you're waiting outside my life again." He became quiet. I continued, "I'm not asking you to promise me forever tonight. I'm not asking you to forget everything that happened. I'm just asking you to stay. Not because you're afraid I'll leave. Not because I'm afraid you'll leave. Stay because we both want to." His eyes filled with tears. "You really know how to make me cry." I smiled. "I'm learning." He took the key from my hand. "Then I'll stay." I didn't need anything more than that. I hugged him, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. We had spent so much time trying to find the perfect words that eventually I realized the most important thing wasn't the perfect sentence. It was the decision behind it. Choosing someone every day. Being honest even when honesty was uncomfortable. Saying, "I'm scared," instead of pretending everything was fine. Saying, "I need you," instead of waiting for the other person to guess. And most importantly, never making someone you love feel like they have to compete for a place in your life. I still think about the wedding sometimes. Not with regret, but with gratitude. It showed me what I needed to understand. The title everyone would have remembered as my wedding announcement became something else entirely. It became the moment I stopped pretending I knew where my heart was going. It became the moment Jimin stopped hiding his pain. It became the moment Taeyoung's secrets finally came into the open. And it became the moment I realized that the person I had been afraid to lose was the person I had been choosing all along. If I could go back, I would change one thing. I would tell Jimin the truth sooner. I would sit beside him before he ever had to cry alone. I would tell him that his feelings weren't a burden. I would tell him that he didn't have to disappear just because he thought I was moving on. And maybe I would tell myself something too. I would say, stop being afraid of the answer. Because sometimes the answer is already there. You just don't want to look at it. For me, it was there every time I looked for Jimin first. Every time his silence bothered me more than it should. Every time I wanted to tell him something before anyone else. Every time I felt relief when he smiled. Every time I couldn't sleep because I knew he was hurting. I had mistaken all of that for friendship because friendship was safer. But eventually, I had to admit that my feelings had grown beyond the word I was using to describe them. And once I admitted it, I couldn't go back. Today, when I think about love, I don't think about a perfect relationship or a perfect future. I think about two people who were scared, made mistakes, hurt each other, and still decided to be honest. That's what makes this story important to me. Not the wedding, not the secrets, not even the moment I finally said the words. It's the fact that after everything, Jimin stayed. And I finally learned how to make sure he never regretted that decision. So if you ever find yourself keeping quiet because you're afraid the truth might change everything, remember that silence changes things too. Sometimes the words you're afraid to say are exactly the words someone else has been waiting their whole life to hear. I learned that too late, but I learned it. And if there is one promise I can make now, it's simple. I won't let fear make my decisions for me again. Not when it comes to the people I love. Not when it comes to Jimin. And not when it comes to the future we are still building together. If my story touched your heart, tell me where you're listening from. And I'll see you in the next story.